We don't want that. We want fire.
Okay.
I missed my tabs.
Yeah.
Didn't you say, or didn't you say that Roger said that this isn't a real budget yet? You don't have to hand it out.
I'm actually talking to him about that right now. We'll cover that later.
And I mean, until I have a go, I'm not going to do it.
We can chat later about after this.
Okay.
As I was coming over, I had the discussion with him.
Yeah, lots of water stuff in there.
He had an email from Karen.
Neil?
Yeah.
I got that taken care of too.
Okay.
I'll answer them when we get finished here. Fire fund, 206.
I tried printing it. Well, I have numbers, I couldn't print it all. It said file protected, and there's a request to open that up.
The only thing we don't have is the cost picture.
I tried going way over that P or whatever.
Okay, I'm ready to go.
All right, guys, we set? 108, it looks like. Roll call, Randy?
The whole board is present. Staff present is Manager Gerard, Fire Chief Shanahan, Accountant Lois Stonehouse is here, Planner Jason McCarthy is here, and Fire Inspector Mike Gregorich is here. That's
Okay,
it.
thanks. Public comment? You guys can speak under public comment if you want to, unless you don't live in the township. Policy discussion. Today is the budget, general fund, and fire department. Today is Tuesday, October 9th, 2018. It's just 1:08 p.m. And it is a work session, so we can stand down a little bit. It's been requested we start with fire first. There is a short narrative. I can't even tell you what page. Like page 3, page 4. Fire Rescue Department, and then the line items, of course. Do you guys have something you want to start off with, or explain, or suggest?
Kick it off. What you have before you was the very preliminary budget that I sent out on August 31st. As you know, we have a statutory requirement, a certain time frame before the end of the calendar year and the beginning of the next calendar year, you have to have a budget in your hands, and that's what this satisfied. At that time, I indicated that it was a very preliminary budget because we still had some major pieces of expense that we did not know what it was going to be for 19, primarily being our health insurance, which we don't receive renewal information until October, which is now, and in fact, I just received some preliminary this morning. We did not know exactly what the cost was going to be because it was in the bidding process for the roads project, and some things like that. The retirement costs, which we now have a good handle on. So anyway, this was preliminary, and basically what you received was my narrative, the general fund narrative, that goes out with the budget, as well as a copy of the narratives from the individual departments. The line item budget that you have is as of August 31st. I made a couple of presumptions in that budget because we didn't know some of the answers. I did an estimate on what the road repair, the millage road repair, was going to be cost-wise. I did an estimate on what I thought the health insurance might come in at as a result of information that we had available in July and August, and also retirement. So I built some of those things into the budget. So there are already funds in the budget to cover most of those on an estimate. I estimated health insurance at a 10% increase. I estimated the road project at I think a little bit higher than what it might come in once all the bidding is done, the road repairs, and made some of those estimates. So those are already in the budget. There's already funds in the budget to address those. So I'm trying to avoid being in the situation, the board being in the situation you were in last year where you had to come back with a surprise increase in health insurance and have to start cutting things out of the budget, which you did. I want to avoid that for this year. So the budget you have in front of you is as close of an estimate as I could put together in August with some anticipated increases built into it. Okay, so as it sits right now, with the information that I received this morning, it looks like we're going to be pretty close in terms of the health insurance. We have quotes from our current carrier as well as follow-up carrier, the Western Michigan Health Plan, that indicates between a 5 and a 9% increase. I have 10% built into the budget, so we should be okay there. We shouldn't have any big surprises with regard to the health insurance. With regard to potential wage increases, I built a factor in there for potential wage increases because we won't know until November in terms of what the CPI for this year has done. They won't be posting it until November, so I've done an estimate based on the first 3 quarters of the year, basically. And that's already included in the budget as well. So I think your budget that you have in front of you is very close to what your final budget is going to be on the revenue and the expense side. So from that standpoint, I think we're starting off pretty clean. What the chief and I are prepared to do today is to address any questions that you may have with regard to anything you've seen in the budget or what we may expect to be bringing up in the actual budget work sessions when you get into those. We do have a couple of ideas that we want to float past the board at this point, at this early point, to see what your position is going to be with regard, and that primarily involves coverage with the ambulance, staff coverage for the ambulance, because we are running, as you probably know, we're running a very significantly increased volume of activity with the ambulance than what we had originally projected, which is good. I mean, it's very good. You know, the residents are utilizing the service. The service is demonstrating that it was in fact needed at the time that you entered the experiment a little over a year ago. So we do have some potential suggestions that we'll talk about during the actual budget process to try and alleviate some of the response issues that we've been having. I'll just tell you what we're talking about is establishing an on-call type of structure for weekend coverage. Right now, weekends are covered strictly by on-call. Whoever's available, we would like to be in a position in 2019 to start having designated individuals be available on the weekends and compensating them for doing that, so we ensure that when the siren goes off, we know who's responding. So that's just a concept that we want to talk to you about to see if you're supportive of that, and if so, we believe we've got the budget structured in such a way that we can accomplish that. So with that, I guess I'll open it up to anything that Chief Shanahan might want to add, or jump right into questions the board members have.
Anything specific?
Are we on fire?
Yes.
I have a question.
I thought the chief was going to start off.
Well, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah,
Somebody's got a question.
nothing to add. No.
Let the chief talk.
Yeah, nothing to add. I guess our budget is pretty much standard as it's been over the years. The only thing I agree with the managers on possibly putting in a part-time on-call staff, and that might be a little more than weekends. It might be, you know, special holidays, stuff like that. We are finding, you know, our group is very active, so there's very few. We're getting more and more of the EMTs, but they're very active on weekends. A lot of family commitments, camps, fishing, hunting, golfing, a lot of things. So the manager and I have seriously discussed that. And really the only other increase, because we're not expecting any capital this year at all, was I think that our ambulance intercept fees were going to go up a little bit more than we might have projected. That might be a little higher than what we have on the sheet that you're looking at. But other than that, I think we're pretty close.
And what's that for, Dan?
The ambulance intercept fees was, I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me.
Those are,
Oh, 809, 337, 809.
Okay. Is that the fee that we're paying? No, that's accounting services, probably, or billing.
That's ALS. I'm sorry, yes. It's, we're BLS, and when an ALS agency assists us, they jump
This is
on
the
board,
difference.
and then we pay them a
Okay.
percentage or a number.
Okay.
if you will, and I foresee that possibly increasing a little more than we might have there.
Well, and actually I had, that was the one thing I wanted to discuss too, hopefully today, was the weekend shift and kick around the idea, not necessarily for next year, but going to an ALS and find out what that involves. And again, that doesn't have to be today's discussion, but
Yeah,
just
well,
kind of keep
in
that.
real short format, ALS requires all paramedics. So,
that's
you
not
know,
feasible.
that would be a significant
Yeah, not for
increase
next year,
in
yeah.
operations
Take a long time.
and equipment.
But I think it needs to be discussed long-term. Just, I think we need to look at it.
Good, it's a possibility long-term, but that would be something that you would really, really need to vet pretty closely, because that would tie into your special assessment fee and would substantially affect it. Paramedic requirement would require full-staff paramedics, and that's a significant cost in acquiring as well as maintaining. And then your ambulance would have to be ALS qualified as well, which means a lot more equipment. So I mean, that's definitely something we can look at as we continue to grow as a community, and would be a serious budget discussion item as well.
Yeah, it'd be a lot more involved. Okay. The difference you have, Randy, on manager recommendation,
There are a couple of places where we have a difference, but it's not a sizable difference. You know, for instance, in firefighting, you know, our run volume is significantly up. It's gone up 13.7%, and I think we need to look at that as a continuing trend. So, you know, there's a difference there in terms of the request column basically is a carryover from 2017, 2018. And I'm saying I don't think that's adequate. I think we're going to be, with our run volumes as they are and increasing as much as they are, I think we have to plan on having more responses. So I've built in a little extra salary cost there. And that's for more hours is basically what it amounts to. We've done an estimate based on that 13.7% increase. I did a calculation and an estimate on what I think will happen in 2019 if we continue on the same trend.
did you use 13.7 again, or another number?
No, I used 50% of that.
Okay.
And the reason I think there's a bigger discrepancy is we were given that number, and then I thought it would fall in line with the Social Security, workman's comp. So I agree with the manager, but since I was given that number, I stuck with it, and then the manager and I had discussed the increase.
The request number that came in basically is you know, as we said, for wages and salaries, we're using 2018. And basically what I'm saying, and the chief and I agreed, that in my column, I'm projecting that we're actually going to increase that for 2019. So that's the difference that you see between the request column and my recommendation column. I guess I would characterize that as, you know, we've spent a lot of time, Dan and I, talking about this along with Rod Cochran and also Mike. And actually, I guess, you know, unless they object, I would characterize my manager suggested column as a joint. You know, we've agreed that that's what we think is going to happen in 19.
Okay. So where do you see those funds coming from then?
Well, they're there. They're in the budget. It's, you know, that with the revenue that's coming in, what that would do is that would reduce the amount of money that would go on extra payment towards the building.
Okay.
Lynn,
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
how is the revenue that has come in from the ambulance offset the cost of the volunteers' wages?
Well, the cost of operating, and I'll let the chief respond to that, but just initially, you know, the actual cost of the ambulance, the purchase price and the equipping price was paid for the first year. That was paid for. And where we're running right now, I had projected for 2018 revenue of about $19,000. I think it was a little over $19,000. $19,500 is what I projected, and I think we're significantly surpassing that. So, but I'll let the chief give you, you know, we can give you a report, a more detailed report on that, but we did talk about it. And if you look at, let's get on the revenues. If you look at the transport fees, What was projected for 2017 was about a little over $8,000, and then we budgeted $19,500 in 2018, and actually the estimated total for 18 is 52. But if we can, based on the trend that we're following, so I think you can see that, and and we basically what I did for that column, the 47,299. Do you have my notes on your copies? I think you have my notes, but you can see on there that I used a 15-month average plus a 13.7% growth rate to come up with that figure. So I went back all the way to the beginning, September of 2017, and used that as a ratio going forward as opposed to just the last year, because we had a slow, we only had part of the year in 17. So I'm trying to be realistic in terms of what we think the revenue is really going to be.
Okay, but maybe I didn't understand. When you were talking about increasing the salaries, if the run volume was 13.7 and you did half again as much, so wouldn't you increase your revenues by about 20% too, rather than just the 13?
Not necessarily, because you're talking about the transport fees, and we don't get reimbursed for every run.
That's right, okay.
And we get different
Just the
reimbursements
cost.
for different kinds of run depending upon what the insurance is.
Okay. So you're conservatively looking at just what the growth was?
Correct.
Okay.
But when you talk about transport, you're looking through actual through June, you've got 32,950. If you follow that all the way through, you're talking 64, 65 on that rather than 47.
But not every month is the same. Through June is you've got your heavy spring, we had students coming back into town later, so that bumped us up in the August area, but the individual months are up and down, so we're trying to do is average that out rather than have spikes.
Go ahead, John.
I guess I'd like to remind the board that the ambulance service, every time we thought about it, was not planned or anticipated to be a profit. And even though it might look very good and healthy as we go into this, I think we have to be reminded that it is a service. That's what we really were trying to do, was to provide a service. And so I would just caution any anticipation of profit until we have a long-term view of what's going on. If we end up in a very healthy situation, we can all be pleased with that. But I don't think we should anticipate that too early.
And, and the other piece to remember on that is that, one of the issues with the decision to go forward with the ambulance wasn't not only what Trustee Marks just mentioned, but it was also to try and recover some of the cost of our operation, because we were doing this service anyway, we just weren't transporting. So what you're looking at, that 47,299 that we're projecting in ambulance transport fees, if that wasn't there, it would have to figure into the special assessment in terms of the cost of operating the system, because we were getting no revenue at all from the BLS responses we were doing without the ambulance. So that 47,299 admittedly, it's a conservative figure. We hope that it'll be higher than that, but at the same time, it's reduced the need for discussing potential increase in the special assessment by that amount. So, there's a lot of moving pieces in here, and this is one of those pieces. And Treasurer Johnson, you're right. If you just followed that geometric increase, it'd be around 65,000. But we're trying to adjust for those months where we don't have very many transports and the months when we do it. So, for instance, coming up now in November and December, we're probably going to see a fairly sizable reduction in runs because people aren't going to be out as active as they were. Those kinds of things. And a number of the runs that we have are the results of outside activities. Outside the home activities. We're seeing strokes, we're seeing a lot of things that are occurring with people out and engaged in activities. So, like you said, we are trying to be somewhat realistic, not overly conservative, not overly optimistic either, because we don't want to be in a situation where we have to come back to you in the third quarter of 2019 and say, we need more money. You know, that kind of thing. Either that, or you have to go back and talk to the residents about increasing the special assessment, because we're not going to be able to make it, you know, for the remainder of the year. We do have some fairly heavy maintenance built in here, because we're anticipating some issues with a couple of pieces of equipment. You know, we've got a millage question coming up. You know, and several people have asked me, you know, why would you be talking about a millage for a piece of equipment? Well, the very simple answer that I give them is because we're trying to avoid having to have financing fees. You know, and people don't realize that if you know, a pumper, if you're going to buy a pumper, you've seen the samples that have been coming around, the basic pumpers, they're about $750,000 to $800,000. If you buy one of those on a 20-year installment at 3% interest, you're going to pay $285,000 in interest.
In interest.
Over that time frame. If it's the aerial at 1.1 million, almost $370,000 of interest payments over that repayment period. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're asking the residents now for a millage. You know, a small millage, 0.6 of a mil. That's going to generate over about 5 or 6 years, maybe 50% of a pumper that we don't have to finance, you know, as a down payments. That's the reason that, you know, we've been talking about this for a number of budget cycles, is what kills you is the interest rates and the interest costs over time. So, you know, that's the simple reason. It's going to have to be paid one way or another, because if it fails, we're going to have to do the installment purchase with nothing down. Then you're going to pay the full interest rate. So, you know, it's actually, it's hard to wrap your head around it, but it's actually a savings for the township residents is what we're looking at. You know, not to have that financing fee.
It's no different than at home. If you know you're going to have to buy a car or fix the roof, you know, you put $5 out of each paycheck in the bank to eliminate some of that upfront stuff. We're just doing it with more zeros.
Right.
John?
There's another part of this too. If all of a sudden you have an emergency and you have to replace a sizable piece of fire equipment, you don't have the choice of soliciting what you want. You may have to take what's available, and that can be a premium. So everything that we're doing now is anticipation of easing the problem that could happen. So.
Well, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be looking long-term. I mean, that's why the DEQ requires 25-year master plans. That's why, you know, a variety of things happen is that you have to look to the future, basically, of what might happen, and that's what Supervisor Grant was referring to. We've had it between herself and the chief and I. We've had a number of discussions about how do we ensure that we can adequately respond any time of the day, any time of the night, with enough staff to meet the need. You know, and that's why the board a couple of years ago expanded the daytime shift. I mean, we've got staff on daytime shift. We may have to start thinking about doing that on weekends and on holidays. You know, and even a second shift, depending on how it actually works out in terms of when the call volumes are. So, you know, those are all things that we have to look at pretty much on a quarterly basis. What's happening and what's the trend? We're about to have a very large construction project right immediately directly behind the fire hall. That's going to put on Sundays potentially 1,000 more people in the township, right there. So, I mean, you know, those are things that we have to consider when we're looking at where do we go in the next 3 to 5 years. What do we do? What do we need to be prepared for? Another 500 cars, moving on the roadways. So, you know, those are the things that we've been talking about for the last 6 months, basically, in terms of what is it that we need to start posturing ourselves to be able to address.
Pete?
I have a question for Randy as manager. 2 years ago, we talked about setting money aside for the budget, and they told us that we had to bond it instead of putting money aside. Now, Larry Merrill, at the last meeting, they had the MTA, he said about setting money aside, and I never got to it. I come across my note last night, and I think you were sleeping.
No, fix
But I just wondering, what's the real policy? Are we allowed to put money aside? We're not allowed to, because we're told that you can't set it aside. Remember, we're talking about the budget and the carryover?
Because it's an
Are you
assessment.
talking about fire department?
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
just to clear me up on that.
you can finance a fire, well, first of all, you don't have to, there's no requirement to have a fire department. But if you choose to have a fire department, there are two different ways that a township, a charter township, can fund and operate a fire department. Number one is by millage. Number two is by a special assessment. If you're doing it by a millage, that's something that's voted in by the public. And that allows you to have a fixed dollar amount, whatever that is, and whatever you don't spend of that dollar amount, you retain in the general fund. You retain in a fund balance, basically, to go towards the following year, succeeding years, or whatever. If you have a special assessment, the legislation in the state of Michigan says that a special assessment can only be levied for the actual cost of the service each year. And what that means is that if you, let's see, special assessment for this year is going to return estimated $582,000, roughly $500. Okay, so let's assume that we have an extremely active year, and we burn up that $582,500 in the first 9 months by calls and fires and whatever. We have a terrible year for the residents. Have a terrible year. Let's put it that way, with incidents and whatever. And that money's gone as of the third quarter of the year. I come to you on October 1st and say, fire department's out of money. You have a choice: close the doors, not operate the service, or increase the special assessment for the remainder of the year by X amount of dollars that we estimated it will take for the fourth quarter. You cannot have a fund balance, you cannot have an excess revenue under a special assessment basis, because at the first of the year, you estimate what the cost is going to be to operate the entity for the year. If there's more, and this is, I think, where you're going, if there's more left over, if you have debt, you can apply that to pay debt. And what we've been doing for the last almost 5 years now is we have financed the fire department. That's on about an 8.5 year payout. We're in year 5. So what the board has done and what we've done is if there's anything remaining at the end of the year in that revenue stream, it goes towards the principal of that building to pay it down faster and minimize the amount of interest we pay on it. That is allowable because that's an operational cost. Right? That's the difference between the two. It's a statutory requirement.
All right.
And we have an assessment right now.
Right.
But
We have
we've
a
asked
special
for the
assessment.
millage for that increase for the equipment.
Correct. The millage, if the voters vote the millage in November, then that will be able to build year to year to year as a fund balance for the specific purpose of the millage, which is to replace fire apparatus.
And it's 6 years, right? Or 5?
6 mils for 6/10 of the mil for 6 years.
6 years, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the question.
Dave?
I guess I'm trying to get my head around with all this is you've got a piece of equipment that costs $1 million, and that piece of equipment is going to last 20 years. That means that every year you use up a portion of that $1 million cost.
Correct. Depreciation.
I don't well, it's not even depreciation, it's an equipment, it's a reserve fund.
It's an asset.
But I don't understand why you cannot put those reserve funds, charge them every year, and put them away for equipment replacement. I mean, everybody does it. The airlines did it. You have engine reserve funds. You have every kind of reserve fund, and you're putting money away. But it's based on how much of that equipment you used up this year.
You can if you're under a millage type of a structure. but
I don't
special
understand why
assessment,
under
you can't.
special assessment you can't do that.
It's the law.
Let me answer the question this way. It's because the legislators decided that was the way the charter township should do it. And there is actual legislation, there is a statute that defines how you can operate a special assessment
And we
for,
do have
for
a-
anything, whether it's fire department or roads or whatever. And it does not allow you to make that kind of a plan. Basically, what you have to do that plan is you have to purchase whatever you're purchasing on an installment purchase that requires a payment, an annual payment every year for a fixed number of years. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
But that doesn't make sense, we're just paying for it up front.
It doesn't make sense at all.
And we do have a legal opinion that you can't do that.
Can you put that into a restricted fund?
No.
I mean, under the millage, you can.
Oh, it will be.
That will be under restriction, so we can't take.
The language that the board adopted that will be on the ballot specifies what that money can be used for. And that is the millage, and that's the ration. It's like we did with the road project. The road project was specific on what that money could be used for. It's not just on any road, it's specific repairs to specific roads that you had laid out in the master plan, basically.
I just want to get that question out.
Yeah, Trustee Wiegand's absolutely right. About 65% of the things that we do in township government doesn't make any sense, but that's the way the legislation is written for under the Charter Township Act. We have lobbied the Michigan Townships Association and the legislature to change some of that. I mean, as for instance, we're capped at 5 mills. That's it. That's all we can. Doesn't matter how big we are. 5 mills operating is what we have. That's it. Unless the voters vote in extra millage, and that cannot exceed 10 mills. If you're in the western part of the Ville of Capri and you go to the eastern part of the Ville of Capri, they can go to up to 27 mills without a vote. City of Marquette. Different regulations. Charter Township Act and the home rule city laws are different. So, I mean, we have the same thing. We have the same fire department, essentially the same police department, same utilities, everything else, but we're capped at 5 mills operating. So general fund can't go over 5 mills. We're at 4.95, I think it is right now, 4.96, because Hadley rolls us back every year. So that's kind of a struggle that we have in putting our budgets together.
That's good information for the public, though, too.
Question.
Okay.
Okay, going back to revenue.
Yes.
On taxes, you have shown a decrease from the estimated, what we've received through June in that. Are we not going to receive that much next year? You get 607,000 actual through June, and we're only requesting 582. And then you look at the general fund is increasing their revenue on taxes. And we're taxing the same entities from the fire department, are we not?
Well, nope, not. Different. They are not taxed. General fund taxes are based on everything in the township. Fire is not.
Okay.
Fire is not taxed on personal property. Fire doesn't get anything out of personal property.
The personal property is $23,000, $24,000, and that's all they.
I'm just saying, there are limitations on what the fire department special assessment is applied to. In terms of the taxes, those come right from the deputy treasurer in terms of what she's calculating is going to be the response. Last year we had a small millage that brought in revenue for the ambulance. That some of that was collected in there, but that is what's estimated right now as the revenue for 2019.
You're talking about that quarter of a mill and that.
Right. But the 582,497 is what was calculated as the yield for the fire department from property taxes. And again, that's a figure that comes from the assessor and deputy treasurer. The bill comes from Lost Creek. The license and permit basically comes from their operations within. So there's not a whole lot of revenue lines in there. In the general fund as well, you're going to see in the general fund is also the proceeds for the 1.5 mil road project shows up in general fund revenues as property taxes, and that comes out as a transfer to township improvements.
So speaking, oh, are you finished?
I know, another question.
Okay.
I saw where the dollars were moved from, for the salary for the fire chief from the fire marshal and that. And I can see that. But I'm looking at hospitalization, where that came from, because I'm looking back, trying to figure out where that came from. Okay, you've got hospitalization of 23,000 and pension of 96, and I'm trying to figure out what fund or what account that came out of in that. And
Well, the prior chief did not have health insurance. He took the opt-out.
Okay, but
So you didn't have anything in health insurance there. Dan has a family and does have the health insurance.
okay.
On the pension, pension was showing up in the fire marshal's department previously, last year. It's been moved to the administration because we have the combined chief fire marshal. So what you're seeing that came out of the fire marshal and was transferred. I had mentioned that in my narrative, salary and benefits of the full-time chief was relocated from fire marshal division to the administration. So it's not an increase, it's just moving. It moved out of fire marshal and into administration.
I was trying to figure out how it all moved around, and I couldn't come up with that.
That's how, because we have to combine fire chief, fire marshal, so that portion came out of the fire marshal, and what remains in the fire marshal are the 2 inspectors.
So the total transfer out at the very last page is 84,000, that's the building loan?
80,000 is the building loan, 4,000 comes into the general fund for clerical support.
Okay, so that's where the 8480 shortfall, if we adopt your recommendation, it would come out of that, it would lessen that number, minus the 4,000.
Yes.
Okay.
John has a question.
Then the other one I was wondering about is the public works protection, fire protection.
Public fire protection?
Right, we've talked about that ever since I've been on the board.
Yeah, and
So
the
we're
public water supply.
Splitting it,
Well,
we're just doing the 20.
We're still waiting for a resolution of the Waterford Charter Township lawsuit, which is on appeal right now. And basically what the question is there is that, in essence, Waterford Township for years had charged the residents under their water utility bill for the public fire protection. A group of residents challenged that in a class action lawsuit that went all the way up through the circuit court in Waterford Township as an unauthorized and illegal tax.
Yep.
Which is the discussion that we've had numerous times over numerous budget years. So what we're doing is we're waiting for that appeal to be decided, and we're simply recommending that we carry on this year, same as we did last year, splitting it between general fund, fire fund, and public works until that case is finally resolved.
Okay.
And then we'll utilize the results of that going forward.
Is it John?
I think there's a number of things that we're all going to be waiting for to help us complete the fire department budget. But I think we're at a point where I'll move that the township managers.
This is a work session, so.
Yeah. We can't do
Well,
it.
okay, all right.
We're
But
just-
Yeah, this is.
I'll recommend that the township manager's estimated fire department budget be adopted as presented until further information is available.
Which will be forthcoming in the budget work, the actual budget work sessions. I'm presuming we're probably going to schedule those next Tuesday at the board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, with that being said, if there's no other specific questions, let's talk about the weekend shift idea and what impact that would have if we tried to do, Dan or whoever wants to explain, I know what it is, but you guys can explain what your intent is.
Well, we've talked about a couple of things, and there are a couple of different avenues that we can go on this. One of the things we talked about was a similar arrangement to what Public Works has, where you identify 2 EMTs, basically, that you pay to be available. You pay them a fixed rate per day to be available. And then if they respond, they get their regular rate of pay. But you pay them an inconvenience pay, I guess you'd have to call it, the call pay. It's an inconvenience pay for giving up their weekend pay to be the responding party. Sometimes you'll get called once, sometimes you'll get called 5 or 6 times, over the course of a day, depending on weather, time of the year, all kinds of things. The other thing that we talked about was, same as we've done Monday through Friday, is to have staffed people physically at the station on pay for Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, as Chief Shanahan mentioned, holidays and other days when we're typically not staffed. So those are 2 things we're looking at. Obviously, the staffed on the weekend is a little more costly. Not tremendously, but then you've got somebody physically on site in the fire hall, doing activity, maintenance on equipment, whatever, and immediately available should the siren go off. Primarily for the ambulance, so we're talking about EMTs. If it's a fire or a car accident or something like that, you're still going to be relying on the call staff, the on-call, the regular paid on-call staff, but you'll at least have two that would be at the station getting things ready for response, that kind of thing. So we've talked about the two different operations, and right now, as you'll recall, we actually have 6 full-time firefighters on the Monday through Friday day shift, because I've employed 2 additionals in my building and grounds department. 2 of our on-call firefighters are actually full-time building and grounds custodians on the day shift. So we have those 2 plus Janelle, our second assessor, is also a firefighter on our department. So we have actually 6 full-time firefighters on staff Monday through Friday. And the response has been tremendous. I mean, it's just, our response rate is very fast.
On call for the weekends for EMS, how many? 2?
2 EMTs.
So
And they would be specified as to which 2.
have we decided what a little bit of difference constitutes?
Well, the difference would be they would still be part-time, so you're not going to be having a bunch of benefits and things such as that. It's just the number of hours that they would actually be there.
I mean,
It's going to be very close.
the cost of
Yeah,
having 2 people at the fire hall on the weekends versus having people on call and then paying them call-out pay.
The determining factor would be what you would pay, what you would agree to pay for the call, being on call, whether it's $200, the way Public Works does it, they get a fixed dollar amount per week.
Assuming that same rule applied, have we got any idea what that figures out to be?
Well, you're only talking 2 days, so it wouldn't be a week, so it would be a piece of that. The on-call, not physically present, would be less expensive. I can't give you an exact figure, but I can give you an estimate by your next session.
I guess that would be the information that would push it one way or the other is what's the cost difference, and
Let's see.
we seem to be getting more
And-
personnel on site if we got somebody over at the fire hall on the weekends versus somebody just on call. It's just a matter of cost.
If you use the same basis that Public Works uses, they get about $325, I think it is, $325 a week. That's $46.50 a day. So you'd be talking, $100. $100 to be on call for that weekend, plus whatever call out there was. On the other side of the coin, what is it, $17.50 an hour? Lois, what's the hourly rate for a stay on call?
$16.82.
$16.82.
Cook?
So that'd be $235 a day with call, and if you scheduled somebody 8 hours, that's be $135 for the 8 hours. So it's gonna be very close, 100 to 135.
So over the year, it's
Minimal. It's not big. And that's what I say, I think we do have funds in the budget currently to cover either of those if the board opts to go in that direction.
But put them, if you schedule them after they're done with their shift, we can still get an on-call,
Yeah, and as Mike just reminded, that, the folks that, regardless of whether they're staffed or they're on call, if they respond, we're going to get reimbursed for some of that, depending upon what the call is.
Yeah, we're gonna get reimbursed for
From
ambulance.
insurance. If it's Medicare, it's, less than it is if it's insurance and those kinds of things. But the gross cost basically is going to be between $100 and $135 a day. So it's not a huge cost.
unlike we had before, we never got paid nothing.
Yeah, so you're talking about roughly $7,000 a year
is cost, or is that the difference?
cost. Unreimbursed cost.
I guess I'm just still trying to get up to what the difference is.
Well,
David,
the main difference is if you've got, my preference would be is to have them physically at the station getting paid, the hourly rate. You know, that would be my preference, because then you know they're there, which shortens our response time frame.
Mhm.
And if our response
Bigger
time is
benefit.
shortened, we usually get the revenue.
What's the average revenue on a call?
Roughly, and Lois would probably give you that number a little better, I'm gonna say 450.
I would say too.
Yeah, around
450.
So you have one call on a weekend and you pay for it
Yeah.
Yes.
by getting the transport.
Yes.
The issue with putting people on call and not at the station is the time delay.
Yes.
Well, I guess,
And we have, when we're on call, we're expected to be at the station within 3 minutes, versus somebody else that might be on call, they might give them 20 minutes, or if they're in the city eating dinner, yeah, it takes you 15 minutes, no big deal. But with the EMS or the fire service, you're expected to be there in 3 minutes, so you're basically at the station anyway, except you're at home. So there's a little difference. And Dave, to figure out exactly how we're gonna do this, I'm not sure exactly what it's gonna take to keep somebody at home, to be at their house,
Dollar-wise.
dollar-wise yet. We've discussed it with everybody,
I'm not gonna do
and
it.
nobody's given us an answer, a definite answer yet.
well, I guess what I keep coming back to is being asked to make a decision. Do you want to consider somebody to be at the station?
That is
Or
my
do you want to
preference.
consider somebody being on call? And what it boils down to me is, obviously, it's always better to have somebody at the station, but the bottom line is what is the cost difference on the budget annually? It costs you $2 to have somebody at the station for the year, and it costs you $1 to have somebody on call, so the difference is $1. So you need to be able to quantify it with something.
Agreed.
The difference is gonna be about $1,800 roughly. 5,200 versus 7,000
A year.
a year.
I think the decision's pretty easy.
Well,
But
the
it-
point of
but
the
it-
discussion was
but
to
it's a
see if you're
staffing
even.
question that has to
yeah.
come to the board, and has to have a board.
Oh, I understand that. I'm just
So,
trying to get my,
you know,
for me, it boils
obviously-
down to budget.
Obviously, if the decision were mine, I'd have 2 people at the station, you know, for both days on the weekend.
That makes
You
the
know,
most sense.
for a number of reasons. One is response, the other is there's additional things that they can do at the station, whether it's filing documents or getting things input into the system or maintaining the equipment or whatever.
Plowing
Just a
snow
variety
on the
of things.
weekend.
Are these full-time people?
No,
Plowing
it
snow
would be,
on the
it
weekend.
would still be on call. I mean, the paid on call would not be full-time. It would
Well, the
only
only thing I'm
be,
looking at, Randy,
it
is
would be there for
that you're
that
asking
day.
them to take 2 more days of the week to stay there instead of being at home and being on call.
right, but
That's
maybe,
what I'm gonna
but
look at.
maybe different people.
Yeah,
You know, you might have 2 on Saturday and 2 different ones on Sunday, depending upon
that would be better.
availability.
Pete-
You know, there's a variety
John is-
of ways that this could work.
John and saying Pete. Go ahead, John.
Cost difference should always be looked at the same time you're looking at response difference. For goodness sake, if it's so small and the response difference is so much greater, what in the world are you looking at?
There's no question.
Ernie?
Before I move on, I'd like to have someone come up, written rationale, why to even consider something like this.
Yeah, you can do that
What are
either.
all the options involved with it, the dollar amounts with each option, and go forward in that. Because we can talk all we want here, but we don't have anything in writing, as far as I'm concerned. We don't have anything concrete to move forward on. And what kind of effect it's gonna have on the manpower there, and that, and are we talking an 8-hour shift if they're up there at the station? Are we talking 10 hours? Or they starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and running to which time? These are the things that haven't been discussed yet.
And that's why we're bringing it up at this session, so when we get into, we're trying to get a feel from the board and what your posture is in regard to some of these things we're talking about, because then we can be prepared for your first budget session to bring you that information.
Does that make sense?
To a certain extent, but I think you go back to when we first were talking about the ambulance, and I brought up at the point, I thought it was a good idea, but I'm also looking at it financially. 18 months out, where do we stand financially on doing all this? Are we breaking even, losing money? I'm not interested in making money, but I don't want to lose money on it either. And if it gets to the point where we can't justify it financially, as far as I'm concerned, maybe we need to look in another direction, even if it's a service to the people and that. So where's the dollars coming from to do all this and that too, so.
The department is tracking that. They're tracking the actual expenses, the expenditures that are put towards the ambulance, including manpower, and then offsetting that with what the revenues are that are coming in. And I think you're going to find, we won't have the exact figures till the end of the year, but I think what you're going to find is that it's very close to a wash, if not a little on the positive side.
That's all I was concerned with at the time when we were talking about it.
So like he said, the point of this is to get your feel for whether this, I mean, this is a change. It's a big employment change for a lot of people, structure and hours and everything. So if whatever reason, 4 or 5 of us said, we don't want to go this way, don't even give us numbers, this is not, something we want to tackle right now, that's what we need to know before he puts his final budget together. So it sounds like we can take the next step and actually get some more definitive information. Pete?
The reason I asked Randy, the manager, the question I'm going to go, because after being at the open house yesterday, we have a lot of young fire people in there and their families.
We do.
All right, they're all on call. They're all working other jobs. And if you want to take one more day away, I know Randy said they could split it Saturday or Sunday or something like that, but still, it's 8 hours away from their family. And just, as long as we discuss that, and maybe the fire chief could be talking in their meetings, the feelings of the group, because I think they got a great group going right there. Very young, perfect, if you had seen yesterday at the open house, and just, let's take a look at their reason. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it either way, but I'm just saying, make sure we ask the question.
Well, and you might think that some of those guys, as passionate as they are, guys and girls, I mean collectively, maybe they want to be a firefighter and they just can't do it right now because they have a family or they don't have the right certifications or whatever. This gives them one more way to get more hours, more experience.
Yeah.
It's just, if we can improve on what we have internally, it's just a plus.
But as long as, like I say, as long as we ask the question,
Yeah.
and we address it, so we know. So we don't have, we do this, okay, but it's
Yeah.
not working into their system because of the young families and stuff like that.
Well, and again, it's, Dan and I are both cognizant of the fact that, when you, and those of you that have scanners have heard it, you get dispatched and then there's a follow-up that says second contact.
Not very often.
Response. But, that doesn't mean that we're not responding. That simply means that they haven't keyed the mic in to say, yep, we're on our way. And they usually do that when they're en route. So, but the whole point of this is, when we embarked on BLS initially and then expanded to transport, the whole idea of this was to provide a timely service to the residents, that are in need. And the issue is becoming there just were not enough ambulances available for the demand, and in some cases we were waiting 15, 20 minutes for an ambulance to get there. We felt that we could do it better, and I think we've demonstrated that we can do it better. Our responses have been very rapid, have been very quick. We were very lucky finding the ambulance we found, but it's getting used, and it's part of that. Part of the issue with the apparatus millage is eventually we're going to need number 2, ambulance number 2, so you always have a backup just in case something happens. But we have that with the fire equipment. We have backup capability with the fire equipment. The ambulance is kind of a standalone for transport. We will still be able to respond as we did in the past, but if the ambulance is out of service, we won't be able to transport, and we'll be back waiting for ambulances. So, all of those things go into the discussions that we've had over a number of months in terms of how we're going to put the budget together and bring to you some questions, and one of them is the staffing question. So we're always looking for a deal on a second ambulance, and if one comes up, we'll probably be coming to talk to you, similar to what we did in the first one. But that's something on the horizon we at least have to be cognizant of, is at some point either our demand is going to require a second one, or mechanically there's going to be a requirement for a second one for reliability.
We've already had a few of those back-to-backs with the city responding and us responding, and then the fire truck goes out to a third call. I think we had 4 at once.
We've recently had, over the last 2 months, we've had a number of those calls where we had back-to-back and a third and a fourth in a matter of 4 minutes. Whether it's a car accident or somebody injured or a stroke or whatever, so we've had essentially 4 vehicles out responding. You know, and that's not happening less often. It seems to be happening more often.
Okay, Dan?
Pete, with your concern on the people with their family lives and stuff, I think generally the guys over there are looking to maybe pick up, if you're only talking, unless they really want more, 1 shift per month for the amount of EMTs that we have, and we've got more EMTs that are going to be going to the next class. So you're only looking at 1 extra day a month away from their family. They're always looking to pick up a few bucks, and I think you'll find everybody anxious to sign up for it.
That's good, as long as we ask them, and, you know,
Right.
if they have any questions about that, they should ask that question.
Right, yeah.
'Cause I know it's different when we were growing up, and, you know, we were in our 20s and 30s, joining organizations and stuff like that, than now. Now people are active, more active in their families than maybe we were, or I would. I'll stick with me, but I don't know about the rest of them. But it's hard. It's so important to have the family together, the parents, and stuff like that. So that's why you just ask the question, you know. I think they'll be going, I think they'll agree with us by doing it that way, but talk to them.
It's nice to see this young blood that's taking their
great.
step forward,
Yeah.
and for a long time it's been kind of stagnant, but now it's really, they're taking their turn and they're moving forward, and it's good to see that.
I think under the new management, I think it's working very good.
Absolutely.
People are happier and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So that's good. I'm happy.
Okay,
We have good community support as well. I mean, that was demonstrated last night. A lousy weather night, we had a lot of people at the open house. It was very well received.
And having
Yes,
fun, too.
there had to be 400 people there? No?
I don't know.
We never did the numbers. Everybody's been asking, but we
Oh my
we
God,
will
it was,
get pretty close, probably maybe tomorrow or something.
I know for the time I was there, it was a continuous cycle, in and out, in and out, in and out. You know.
We're gonna count hot dogs.
I was just gonna say, count your hot
How we
dogs.
ordered, we're gonna figure out what's left and go from there. That's the best.
We'll add
we
2
got.
more, because we didn't eat.
How many hot dogs did you go through? In Broad?
So, no, yeah.
Yeah, I think we went through probably 150 hot dogs,
Brats.
80-ish hamburgers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good gauge anyways to go
Yeah.
use
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
a lot of people there.
Well, I saw the cars, and then, you know, there were a few people out in the rain at the trucks, and I thought, well, this is early, because it was like 5:30. And I walked in, and the place was packed. It was great. The kids are running around, lifting the body out of the basket.
Yeah,
It was
they're having fun.
great.
I know my grandkids had a lot of fun.
Good thing I wasn't that thing.
But, you know, other than the things that we've discussed, it's pretty much last year's budget. You know, we've got some maintenance issues in here that, you know, that are very similar to what you saw last year, and they're going to be every year. You know, we're replacing some of the Nomex coveralls, we're replacing some of the fire boots, the things that are wearing out. You know, we're replacing some pagers, which you've seen year after year after year. We try to do 5 to 10 pagers a year. You know, radios, we just got all new radios under the grant. We've got 4 new firefighters coming in, so, you know, we have to do new uniforms and, you know, those kinds of things. So those are built in here. Hose, we always need hose. Every time we go for hose testing, we find, you know, and also, did that legislation pass on hoses about time? I don't think it passed.
Boy, I don't think it passed yet either. It was.
Yeah, 'cause there was legislation.
We have some pretty old
every
stuff.
5 years, I think it was, you had to replace all your hose.
That didn't go on.
And I don't think that passed, but, I mean, that would be a huge expenditure. So other than that, you know, it's pretty straightforward budget.
So I think the direction we want to give the manager then is, and Dan and staff, Mike and Ron, thank you, Rob, is to kind of look into this more and see what impact it'll have, give us more numbers, rationale,
We can do
what
that
kind of, how
here.
many staff members we're talking. If we have enough that are qualified, maybe it's one night every 2 months. You know, if we have enough people that are interested and qualified.
And
might not be as
you may have folks that just say, I'll take every weekend, you know.
Yeah,
It's done in individual family situations.
yeah.
You know, it's just nice to see the enthusiasm in the fire department.
Yeah.
you do have some single people that would be interested too. You know, I think it's going to be well received if that's the route we go.
It has been discussed. What that number, I mean, I've discussed, now with the manager, we've discussed all the options, of course, and we're still discussing, and we haven't come up with a good number yet. I mean, but we have discussed it amongst the EMTs, and it's been discussed, and what would it take to keep you home or at the station? You know, like I said, because everybody's active, is it worth it for, you know, we're working on it, and we hope to we will have something by the next session, I would assume. I mean, a good number for you.
By your budget session.
A better
First
number,
budget session.
a good number, I should say.
Now that we know that there's some interest on behalf of the board.
And we were talking about revenue, Dan, I believe you brought it up. Really, you could look at our, the revenues on the ambulance transport fees and do minus about 3 things, and that's going to tell you where we're at. And it's a pretty good number. Because we're not counting the personnel, which is obviously our bigger number, but since we were doing it previous, we won't add it in now. I mean, we could, but we're not now because we weren't, you know what I'm saying, you get where I'm coming from?
So you have a good
And
comparison.
in this revenue too, I mean, the weekends right now, generally, we do not get a transport. And if we go that route, we'd have those transports, so that figure is gonna rise up also.
Well, we definitely pay for itself.
Oh, yeah, and I think what Stan is alluding to is, as we're looking at that comparison of whether it's a break even or not, we're discounting, because we would have responded anyway.
Right.
You know, so we're taking that cost off. We would have responded with the pickup truck, but the actual increased cost is the cost of the vehicle versus the revenue that's coming in from the transport. So that's how we're assessing whether we broke even, make money, whatever, because we would have had the staff cost regardless. That's the same.
Like John said, we're not interested in making money. If we can
No.
break even and pay for some of the salaries and some of the on-call pay, great.
Absolutely.
That's just perfect. And we're providing a much better service to the community.
Okay, are we good? We can move away from fire and get into the general fund. Let's see what kind of information they can bring us in the next budget session.
Mike and I have work to do.
Thanks, gentlemen.
No, thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Just about an hour, that's good, that's what I was.
We say amen at a budget session.
Yeah, we can, instead of making a motion. All right,
All right, for the general
General
fund,
fund.
I will reference or refer you to my August 31st transmittal memo. Now, what I tried to cover most of the things in the transmittal memo of giving you a picture basically of where we were as of August 31st. As I mentioned, we have a couple of differences when we get general fund up here. A couple of things that we now have a better handle on than what we had back in August. And one in particular, the big one, the big expense is health insurance. So we now have a better handle on that. I projected in the budget, I have 10% increase in the budget. And it looks now like we're going to be somewhere between 6 and 9%. Now, that's going to vary, because remember, we have 2 separate plans. One plan is being proposed at a 6% increase. The lesser plan is being proposed at a 5% increase. But then they're also proposing consideration of an HSA plan, which is a little bit different. That would be a reduction. So somewhere in that range is where we'll actually end up after talking with the bargaining units. So I would suggest that we leave the 10% as is in the budget for now until we wrap up, because remember, we've still got the last quarter here of 2018 to see what those numbers really distill down into. Now, the numbers that just got the preliminary renewal figures, and I just transmitted those today to the 2 bargaining units for their review to take a look at. They do have some changes in them. Some changes to, I think, co-pays, were a couple of changes to keep the percentage increase lower. So those all need to be discussed. In the general fund, the revenue line that you see under taxes 401 under the revenue includes the road millage that's coming in, and down at the bottom of the budget sheets, you'll see that there's a transfer out to the Township Improvements Fund to cover that. So that money is an in and an out. It comes into the general fund, inflates the total revenue picture, and then is decreased later in the budget, transfers to the Township Improvements Fund, which is where the road millage gets paid out of. So I'm not sure where board members want to start. Do you want to just jump on first question? I think the memo, I think, pretty much hit the high points of where I'm proposing changes. I am proposing that 2 board members go to the MTA conference. And, it would be ideal if they would rotate each, year 2 different board members would go. So after 3 years, all of the board members will have had the opportunity to go through the MTA conference.
No, I have been against that from day one. Any board member wants to go to the MTA conference should be able to go because there's so much information there.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, it's just a cost issue. If the board wants to do that, then I'll amend the budget to reflect that.
You're just talking about board members, not the officers, not the supervisor, the clerk, treasurers, they got their own budget for that.
Correct. For the 4 trustees.
I'll be honest with you, I may not be able to go.
I understand.
The way things look right now.
Well, do you want to hit planning since Jason's here?
Step on up to the table.
You can give us your thoughts, your ideas. You know what you want to do. 721.
Where are we at?
Planning is line item 721.
Probably like page 5 or so. 6, the 6th page in general.
The only change that I have from last year's budget is a $1,000 increase in attorney services. We're going to be coming up on some complex land division issues, likely with the Westwood Mall. And it does require some additional scrutiny with making sure that we get those right. So other than that, it's basically a carbon copy of last year.
And these figures do not include the increase to health insurance or anything else. I've got that in one separate line item that would be spread throughout the entire budget once we know what that number is going to be.
Okay.
So what you're looking at under salary appointed officials and the roll-ups, the taxes and that are predicated on 2018 costs. And that's the same throughout the budget.
You find it? I didn't have any questions. I don't know about anybody else.
It's straightforward.
Yeah, if board members want to know where those funds for health insurance and potential wage increases are, they're in under expenditures under the township board, under your miscellaneous line 955. That's that 18,852. That's what that is.
Yes, John. Thank you.
Any close look at the manager's estimated budget for the general fund can see that there's very little change at all. So I'll recommend at this time that the township manager's estimated budget for the general fund be adopted as presented until further information is available.
I thought you were just gonna say amen.
That makes him feel good, that's okay.
Should I hit him, John?
Well, we need to get off the dime.
I know it. Well, there's not much changes
Just wanna
in
make
it.
sure,
You know.
yep. Jason had asked for some AV equipment. It's not in his specific budget, but
Yeah, CIP
since
thing.
he's here, do you have any questions for him, or we don't always get to have him to talk to?
Can you give the board an overview, Jason, of what we're looking at in the community room for upgrades, since we're kind of 5 years out now? And
Sure. So the idea was that you have a large room in the community room, and you have a 60-inch television in there now, which is adequate for small groups. But for larger groups, and we do have a number of them that come through yearly, whether it be Fish and Wildlife, the DNR, DEQ, we do have a lot of service agencies that utilize the room, as well as private events. It would be nice to have an electronic drop-down screen with a ceiling projector, and then you'd have two sources of your AV. And did provide some estimates to Manager Gerard for that. We believe that that number could be whittled down even more. But, you know, somewhere in the $6,000 to $8,000 range, I think we could have a really nice setup in there. And I think that that cost would be, or could be recouped over time through either a slight raise in user fees, or if they're going to be utilizing that specific, you know, equipment, they could, you know, pay an additional fee. That'd be up to the board, but we believe that, you know, that those improvements are warranted, and that those are requests that we get from other people that are using the room currently.
The other thing we discovered too with one of the last events that was in there was it's almost a disparity between the two rooms, between the boardroom and the community room, because it was initially set up and engineered so that if we had an overflow in here, we could display everything in there. So that means microphones and everything are connected. And when we had some speaker issues at one of the last venues, that's where that discussion came out. There's a lot of wiring and stuff up in the ceiling that really should be, even if we don't change anything else, it should be divided out, because it's not a good working system right now. The two should be separated. This microphone should be separate from what's going on in the community room, because for whatever reason, we don't have the overflow we expected, which is great, you know, to have that many people, but in any case, we could make accommodations for that.
Well, and another issue that came up with that is you can't have two events with two sound systems, because they're gonna hear us in there.
Yeah, they bleed over.
And I mean, it's not very often, but there is times where we do have a board meeting or a planning commission meeting, and that room is busy also. So we're actually restricting that use of that room for that time.
So I don't think that was even part of your initial changeover with looking for the...
It was actually,
was?
yeah. That estimate
Because it
includes
had to be?
an additional
Okay.
audiovisual receiver, which would be specific to that room.
Okay.
Right, that estimate was around 10,000, and Jason's right, I have asked them to sharpen the pencil. Basically, it's 906 Technologies to, I'm sorry, it was, yeah, it was 906. Yeah, it was 906, so I have not received that back yet, but you'll notice if you go all the way down to the net effect, we're based on the budget figures that are here, there'll be somewhere between 11,700 and maybe 36,000 that, depending on some of the expenses that might be available to apply towards some of that. And there's also the secondary issue that we've been talking about is the potential lack of office space. Now that we've added additional professional positions, you know, we're getting tight on office space, and there's been discussion about converting a conference room back into an office, so that we'll have some figures as well on what that would be if the board wishes to go in that decision.
That's another item that I had on my list, and I think we need to couple that with the office structure and the handicap issues and safety requirements we were talking about, you know, putting some kind of security at the front desk, whether it's bars or windows or locks or something. So I'd like to have that kind of a discussion all entwined
Yeah, and that
at a
is more,
different time.
that's more of a structural facilities type discussion that I think we should have outside of the budget process, because that's a totally
Yeah, it's a
separate, we would have to
philosophical
finance.
somewhat.
Well, we'd have to finance that separately, there'd be a separate financing type of an issue to accomplish that.
Pete?
Then, Manager, we do charge for these meetings for people to use them?
Yes, and that revenue, Andrea, I can distribute that if the manager doesn't have it,
Yeah.
but it has been increasing over the years.
Yeah, and we are, if you look at, when you see the final fee structure, you'll see that we are increasing the room rental cost to be a little more competitive with what the actual costs are. And again, we're not looking to make money with it, but we don't want it to cost us money. We want it to be a break-even type situation. So we're looking at a small increase, basically as it sits right now. But as Jason mentioned, if we do increase the audiovisual, expand it, make it bigger, it would be a relatively small cost increase for rentals.
Well, you mentioned the DNR and all, sometimes people don't charge for the rooms, but
Well,
I just
no,
want to make sure that
last-
everyone knows that we do charge for the rooms.
Oh, we are, everybody, because the only time that we don't charge for the room use is if we're sponsoring the event. Otherwise, last year in 2008, for 2018, the board took a position of saying everybody pays, because we were taking the position that other local governments wouldn't, would be provided, and we became the location of choice as opposed to, necessity. So this year, we have been charging everybody unless, as I say, unless we're sponsoring an event of some sort. Like, as for instance, today, we hosted the Corridor Committee, US 41 Corridor Committee. We didn't charge for that because we hosted it here at the Township Hall.
And we have Sarah Kimbenzi coming in on the 23rd. We
Right.
don't charge her for that.
We're hosting.
We're hosting that
Yeah.
as a public,
Yeah, something
bringing
we're
the
doing.
legislators in for a public session.
Dave?
The capital improvement request, everybody keeps saying that there's a payback on that. Any idea on what the payback is on it? I realize it's only a $10,000 expense, but any recommendation on the fees changes that would offset that expense, or is there an additional charge for use of that equipment that would offset that expense? So
I would do it for every rental. It wouldn't just be for those folks, it'd be just a flat addition to the room rate charge to recover that.
And if people know that's available, they're going to utilize it too.
Most of the, I'd have to say most of the rentals that we have had have utilized the audiovisual system. Either if it's a baby shower or a wedding or a wedding reception or whatever, running pictures on the screen and all the birthday parties, everything else, they're utilizing those screens as kind of entertainment. Their own, obviously, and plugging in their jump drive or whatever, and running their own program. Or if it's a group type of event, they're using it to instead of a chalkboard, they're using the screens basically.
Well, the assessing classes, we've had all that.
Yeah, most of the rentals do. There have been a few that haven't, as for instance, when the quilters were in here, they didn't use the screens at all because they were using all the tables, they had everything, their material on the table. But most other groups do utilize the AV system.
I guess my comment was is that type of equipment can't be good for more than 5 years.
Well, probably three to five. And it's been 5 years now and we've outgrown it.
So are over 3 years, are we going to get $10,000 in increased revenue from the rate changes, or
Yeah, I think we will, because we're seeing an increased use, and now that we're charging everybody, let's see, on the revenue page, community center use fees went, we're at about 10,650, projecting, just based on an average, it looks like a reduction, 7,975, but that's the average over the last 4 years. So that's what I plugged in there. I tried to get back to an average in terms of what we've actually used. Some years have been much higher, other years have been down lower, but we're projecting 7,975. If it goes over that, that's just additional revenue.
I would argue that if the equipment was installed next year, it would be good for 5 to 7 years.
I was thinking 5 anyway.
Yeah.
So are we suggesting a rate increase that goes along with the installation of that equipment?
If the equipment is authorized, yes. Right now, I am proposing a rate increase, a slight rate increase right now, just to cover increased
For
costs from our staff for everything. But if the board agrees that we want to go in that direction and increase that, then that would be added to it. We'd recalculate what that fee would be. It's not going to be large. It will not be a big increase.
And aren't we actually right now lower than a lot of the other facilities in the
Well,
area?
We are, because they're using it as a revenue stream, basically, and we were providing it as a service to the residents mainly, as opposed to a revenue stream.
Now, if somebody wants to come in and play cards and they've got groups and they're township residents, we're still not charging for that, right?
If it's a minor use, and we're open anyway, the main issue that we're covering is our additional costs when we're not otherwise open, evenings, weekends, things such as that. If we're here, the building's open, small groups have come in, groups of residents have come in, they've just gone down and sat at a table, that's fine, we're here anyway, the building's open. What we're actually recovering in that charge is the cost of our staff to open, to close, to clean, those kinds of things. And that's what the board had originally opted for, as opposed to a revenue source.
The only thing they see is the parking. We have a little situation with parking at times.
We do. Yeah, we've had some fairly large gatherings, primarily wedding receptions and things such as that, that fill the parking lot up pretty quickly.
The bridge tournament is pretty popular.
The what?
Bridge tournament.
Oh,
Could be a
my
major
God.
revenue
That
stream.
was popular.
That's right. But I think we're going to have to do is tag off this over on the side by the office during the week, just for business only, the 4 or 5 parking spots.
In front here?
Yeah, over here, yeah, by our front door.
One of the other ideas that planning and/or the rec committee has been discussing would be adding a pavilion and a windscreen wooden fence to kind of block some of the wind. I think that some of the wedding receptions would really enjoy having a covered pavilion, and perhaps that's something that we could go after with a grant opportunity through the MNRTF or something in the future. So I think the rec committee is going to maybe recommend adding that as a potential project in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, just as a real rough crunching numbers here, let's assume that it's a $10,000 investment to do that. And we know that we're rented just about every weekend, so if you break that down, it's like $38 a weekend to recover that $10,000 over a 5-year period.
That's not bad.
That doesn't count what we do during the week.
No, that's just weekend. That's just assuming weekend rentals.
Yes, Dave?
And I guess what I'm suggesting is that it would be the recommended rate increase after that equipment's installed. That should be part of the CIP request as in part of the expected revenues.
Right.
Okay. Yes, Ernie?
We were talking about parking. I got thinking all of a sudden, watching that construction that's going on down where.
Next door.
First thing I thought of, where are they going to be parking down
Yeah.
there?
Well, that's their own lot.
I know that, but you know how people act.
We have rental
Oh, yeah.
parking.
Well, that's, the building that's being there is a relatively small office building, and these 2 offices. Yeah, it's 2 offices, and they've got their own required parking. They'll have their separate parking lot, and they will be divided by boulders. We do have boulders down there that have been moved to allow for the construction at the moment, but those will be replaced.
That's the first thing that came to mind when I saw that thing. Our parking lot was real close to them.
You can always bring in Mona.
We could have bought it.
Yeah.
We talked about buying that last.
But we are starting to fill in, the area here is starting to fill in. There's buildings are being built, and, we're seeing that activity. So within probably the next 5 years, it'll probably be full, I would suspect.
I have more questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Going through your narrative and that, I got down to professional services.
Yes.
I'm getting back to this tunnel and that. I keep looking at the dollar in that. Do we have any figure yet as to how much we have paid and how much we're going to pay or contribute from taxpayers for that underground tunnel?
Nothing.
Zero.
Oh, yeah, yeah, some cost.
No.
Everything's gonna be
No energy
covered.
cost. We're not gonna do any maintenance. The Snowmobile Club and the DNR are doing the maintenance.
We need lighting in
I'm
there.
gonna keep asking the question, and that too, at some point in time.
We have nothing budgeted for that.
Nothing budgeted for that, okay. We'll keep-
That's
I
what
do
the board
have,
said.
however,
The
I
board
do
made-
have budgeted for the roundabouts, because we do have some responsibility in the roundabouts. We have to provide the lighting, we have to provide the in-ground watering and the plantings.
Yeah,
Then we want it, don't want it.
that was a big farce as far as I'm concerned.
Pardon me?
Well, we told them that too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
told them point blank that, so, because they never did bring that up at the meeting, the first real discussion they had with us. There was no discussion there. And I know when Sands was, they were talking to Sands, I mentioned to the supervisor out there, she was flabbergasted, so she asked the question. And they says, we're not going that way, we have to pay it.
I thought the DDA was gonna cover a portion of that.
Well, we may, the DDA might.
We're meeting tonight if you'd like to come at 5:30.
Yeah,
Why not?
that is a discussion point within the DDA. Yeah.
A couple other things I have in that
Yes, sir.
too, so. You're talking about increasing staff here from 3/4 to a full-time,
Building and grounds,
building and grounds. And
yes.
one of them, we're talking about Lions Field Pavilions. We're closing that up at 5, are we not now?
Well, temporarily we are. That's because of the vandalism that was done, the damage.
Yeah.
And what I'm proposing is that by increasing that 3/4 time to a full-time position, we will have the ability to have a first and a second shift with an overlap in the middle. So we would be staffed right through 8 o'clock.
Okay.
And then, we would be able to leave that open. Our intention is to go back to being open until 10, and we're trying to do that without incurring overtime.
So you have a building and a ground, you have a recreation. Is that one and the same, or is that two?
It's two separate operations, but it's the same people. It's split. The same 3 people are split between those two, building and grounds and recreation.
Okay, and then I'm going down here on capital, you're talking about replacing laptops. What's the projection for the old computers and that? Are we gonna sell them, utilize them in the office somehow or that?
They would be available for sale. I mean, we will try to recover. The problem is that we've had them for about 5 years and they're getting outdated with new programming. They won't run the new programming. So that's the reason we're looking at replacing them. But they have some value, not high. They would be made available for purchase. We would probably advertise that they're available. They're a decent laptop, but they're sizable, pretty good size, and several board members have indicated they'd rather have a tablet than a laptop. Same with staff. But we are getting to the point where 5 years is pretty much pushing technology with laptops and computers.
Can't even do the updates if they get too old.
I know.
They won't accept it.
Now, my hard drive crashed and I had them replace the hard drive, but it's getting to the point where, it won't run the new programming.
Of course, it doesn't matter with Microsoft, you do an update and it wipes your drive anyway. It takes all your pictures and all
When
your
it says
data
replace, I don't know
files.
if they mean me or their computer.
Yeah, operative replace.
But again, that is in there as an option, because the board, several board members had indicated that they needed to have replacements on theirs, so it is budgeted, it is in here as a budget item. We do have quotes on those. If the board opts not to do that and not to replace them, then that will go into the net effect at the end.
Lynn, can I ask a
Sure,
question?
yes, go ahead.
Under capital 301, the police vehicle, are we
Yes.
getting rid of this one here and picking up another one?
Remember we got a reprieve, because when we got the new Charger, within several months it was totaled, and it was replaced with another one, but it took about 4 months to get that, get it equated. So we target 80,000 miles. When the patrol vehicle gets to 80,000 miles and we replace it, that we're projecting that that's going to be in 2020. So I'm budgeting half of that cost this year, the other half in 2020.
And it should have how many miles when we get it?
About 80,000. And then we'll sell the one we have here, which it's our typical. We usually sell the one that we've recovered, and used for transport around town and back and forth to Lansing. We sell that for around $5,000, put that back into the general fund to offset some of the cost. And then we retain the replacement, and that's what we'll use to travel with.
Because the one we got now is not, sometimes not very reliable. I mean,
Well,
100-some thousand miles.
It's reliable, but we've put like 35,000 miles on it,
Yeah.
running back and forth to Lansing. So it's getting to, even, you know, I didn't use it this last time I went to Grand Rapids because I was coming back late Friday night, and I didn't want to get stranded someplace with 130,000 miles on it. But the car is solid. We use it around town all the time, and most fire department uses it to go to their trainings, and you know, I typically use it. I think it's the first time I used my personal vehicle on a trip.
Well, I think it's just time to get rid of
Years.
it. And we're not utilizing it the way we wanted it to save miles. And that.
Well, we're saving a lot of mileage.
Well, there, you know, a lot of runs downstate that we're not using it, so.
Oh, most of the runs we do. I mean, I know the last one that Jason and Isaac went to, same thing. If they're coming back late at night, like a Friday or something like that, rather than get stranded, we took them.
So it's all right to get stranded in the daytime, but not at night.
Well, you're going to get service in the daytime. You know, that's the issue. You know, you're going to get service in the daytime. You won't get it in the middle of the night north of Bay City. But I, you know, the last time I did a cost comparison, the first year we did that, we saved about $14,000 in travel expenses. All we pay for is gas. That's all we pay for. Let's see, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One, Treasurer Johnson brought up was my recommendation to increase the building and ground. Were there any other questions for Jason on planning, or is that pretty much done?
Pretty much done.
Okay.
Thanks, Jace.
Thank you, sir.
You know, and my whole point for that is that you know, it gives us a better ability to service what we have with two separate shifts, basically, and to avoid not a lot of overtime, because there still will be some on holidays and things such as that, but reduce our overtime and give us better flexibility to be more present in those areas where we're having some vandalism. So that was one thing I wanted to bring up. Pete brought up the police vehicle. You know, that's going to be a 2020 expenditure, but I'm breaking it. You see that it's 18.5 in this year, and 18.5 will be in 2020 budget. We're estimating about $36,000 for the car equip. That's the most recent estimate we've gotten. Let's see. On the transfer out, you'll see $497,267 going out to the Township Improvements Fund. Of that, $368,473 is from the road millage, and then the general fund is contributing $128,794 out of general fund funds to offset that. Remember, when we went forward with the road project, it was understanding that we were going to have to be subsidizing it because of the reduction from the dark stores issue. But we felt that that was a wise investment. I typically put $50,000 towards road maintenance, so we're increasing it to that much, and that will be a decreasing amount as we go forward that the general fund will be contributing. So I'm going to point that out, so board members aren't surprised by it. Let's see, what else was there? The police. And we are funding the upset. The $1,000 is back for upset. That's part of the police.
One thing that we don't have here anymore is the dark store. Contribution to the dark store.
What do you mean?
Should we donate, or budget to donate some money, because, you know, we have to win this thing. So,
I think we've donated quite a
We
bit.
put $250,000 into
Yeah.
our case with no help from anybody else. They all rejected it. Nobody thought that it was going to bother them. Nobody thought that it was going to be important enough. It was just a simple Marquette Township issue. We ran it all the way through the Court of Appeals, and we funded all of that all the way up to the Supreme Court. And nobody assisted other than the county with $1,200. Quite frankly, I think we contributed our share.
And everybody else's. They haven't even collected that much so
Well,
far.
the $250,000 does not include our staff time, does not include any of that we did. That's just out-of-pocket costs for the attorney fees and for the presentations of the cases. But I think it's significant to remember that nobody Not anyone that we communicated with every county, we communicated with every organization, and nobody wanted to assist us.
Not even locally.
Nobody.
Not even with a
Understand,
letter of
nobody.
support.
No, well, the county, $1,200, and then the county turned around and spent $200,000 on another case. So, you know, I mean, this is, the amount of money that it's cost this region is absolutely ludicrous, but it has.
Over my budget next.
Can we?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah, 'cause
only,
you're in general.
not, and that doesn't even include the losses, the tax losses.
Exactly.
Ernie?
And I'm a
Just-
little agitated by that whole issue.
Couple of questions,
Yes,
yes.
sir.
On the capital for the police, you're talking 18,750 this year. You're putting that aside
Yes, sir.
on capital?
Yep.
Is that going into a special account then?
It's staying in the general fund as a reserve account for that future purchase. Same thing we did with the park equipment. And that'll carry in the general fund as a target, an identified expenditure to be utilized in 2020.
I think the other one is the charter dollars that we're
Charter?
getting every quarter on
Yeah,
that. We're supposed to have that in a special account
It's for technology,
for technology
communications.
and that, so that's
for the
where that would be
residents.
coming out of and that too, so.
yeah, and that shows, that's under the, you'll see that in the revenue.
Yeah.
Yes. It's about 68,000 somewhere in that at this point.
Yeah, there it is, ATV.
CATV, yeah, projecting 68. And we increased that from 3% to 5%
Right.
last year.
Which is when we start having the discussion about the computers,
Yeah.
or I did, you know,
And
with
on
Randy.
individual stuff.
Yeah, we need to make
Can we
some
use that
updates.
for?
I was just wondering about that.
That's what we were
Yes.
talking about,
Yes.
yeah.
No, so don't, put the pressure on our budget, take that money and pay off some of the increases, improvements for the room over there.
Well, but remember, the 68 is still part of the working budget too.
I know,
It's not
right.
extra.
But that's what you're
over
supposed to be
above.
using that money for. is
Exactly.
Stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think the other thing is that, and I think I talked to the manager here many months ago about the handicap accessibility here.
Yep.
yeah,
That's,
that's gonna be in our structure.
when you head to walk with a walker or cane, you start trying to open these doors, it gets very hard.
Yeah, and we've had estimates, we've gotten estimates on what it would take to convert, you know, the entryways to the, you know, to the push panel, the push button basically that opens the door, and, you know, and those kinds of things. So that, I think we, at some point as a separate discussion, need to have a facility discussion, you know, specific facility. And I think, you know, well, and realistically, I think we need to come up with an entire facility plan, a building plan, and then we finance that.
Yeah.
Finance that separately and build that into the budget for repayment.
And generator, I think that needs to all be, that's part of my plan here
Part of
to
the
have.
security.
Yeah, we need to talk about the building in our future. Or land. We need to talk about land too. Anything
You need
else
to
for the
throw in over
manager?
Adding on to the building.
I had one other question, and this goes back to Pete's always asking, new lights, lights on the streets and that.
Streetlights?
Are we
Is
projecting
street
out
lighting-
any new?
Street lighting is.
I see street lighting and it's somewhat increased, but I don't know how much of that's for new or for the additional costs for current.
Street lighting.
It's 448.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot in there for additional lights, because we're absorbing, you know, there's a fairly sizable increase in the electricity as a result of what occurred last year.
If we can get the DDA to get a grant to pay for them lights out there, and we can spend our money on local, you know,
Yeah.
We
100%
did, yeah, we
of it.
did get some grants. We're gonna end up paying about $26,000 for the roundabout lighting, you know, out of our funds. You know, and you'll see some of that's in the budget. The DDA has discussed lighting generally within the DDA, and in fact, that's one of the things they'll be talking about tonight at their meeting at 5:30 is, you know, what is going to be the priority going forward? Is it going to be lighting? Is it going to be pedestrian access? What direction does the DDA want to go in? So that discussion is going to be ongoing tonight.
and who pays for it?
Well, there'll be a levy within the DDA. We can levy up to 2 mills.
I thought the discussion originally was for that $26,000, is that there was some left over.
DDA, yeah, there is, the DDA, there's about 35,000, I think, it was round numbers, about 35 total, and the DDA is committed 26.
Okay, all right.
Each light we put in, it costs, I think it's $13 and some odd cents a month, every street light.
Well, and the reason the DDA has made that commitment is because, you know, you're talking an eighth of a mile on either side of the roundabouts. You got 2 roundabouts, and that's gonna bring lighting with what already exists almost all the way to Commerce Drive. And then now the discussion is, how do we go from this intersection east, you know, in the darkest parts of the DDA's portion of the highway? How do you light and where do you light? You know, those types of things, and that's part of the discussion. Not going to be able to do it all, but doing it in piecemeal pieces, basically, to light the darkest areas and the most heavily used areas, and make sure they get lighted first, and then pick the others up as we go along.
Anything else? We can hit the clerk's budget. I think he'd like to get his part finished. Since we're
Yeah.
still on general.
It's pretty straightforward. Salary elected officials is at 13,195 unless the board changes that. Would like to go up again.
Let us catch up to you. I missed my tabs, Lois.
Well, you'll have one for your
I
next
know,
meeting.
I know.
Yeah, Lois
This
has
is
most of
just-
the books put together, but we needed to get some questions
I'm just
answered
going over
today
the
before we
narrative.
finalize the sheets and insert
Yeah, but
those.
it's not in the front. This is just,
No, it's back by the fire.
you know.
215. Account number 215.
I think yeah, there we go. I did bring them in order.
Salary appointed officials is $250, $50 for the deputy clerk, and $40 if she attends the board meeting, and $10 if she comes in and signs a check, which she hasn't done. I've been pretty around, so. Accountant salary is $66,524 as per the collective bargaining agreement. Overtime pay was budgeted at $500. We have no election scheduled for 2019, but the last time I had that, I had 3 elections that year, so hopefully we don't have any elections. Benefits are per township policies. Supplies are pretty static with what they were previous, and everything else is pretty close to what I had the year before. My budget request for the clerk is $98,375, which is 1.3% over 2017. I'm not planning to go to the MTA conference, so actually we might be right on task for last year. So, and if we don't use some of that money, our budget will probably remain the same.
Voting equipment is, all right?
Voting equipment is new as of last year. We have a 5-year reprieve on any fees for that, but in year 6 through 10, we're going to have a $6,000, I think, fee every year to pay for that. I think that's the agreement we signed, Lois, something like that.
That was a state, something
Yeah, and
like
that's
state.
through the state, so we got a 5-year reprieve for the first 5 years on that equipment. We don't have to pay anything, but year 6 through 10, I think it's $6,000 a year we pay. So that won't hit until 2023 or 2022. So that's a future expense that we'll budget for, and I think my budget can handle that. Other than that, I have nothing else in my budget other than from what we had last year. Like I said, no elections, so that'll save a little bit of money. Because every time we have an election is about $4,000. I'm thinking, hey, Lois, somewhere in there, 3,000 to 4,000, maybe even more. So that's what we spend for each election.
So what happens if we end up with one? How do you?
Well, if we do, we'll have to budget amend it, and it depends on what kind of election it is. If it's an election from an outside group, usually those expenses are reimbursable. So we don't really get hit that hard with it, with expenses. Like if the school district wants to have a millage question, or the state will, wants a special election, they'll usually reimburse us for the whole cost, I believe, right? Well, it's most of it. So it doesn't hit us that hard. But anything that the township would like to put on there would be our cost. And I think the last one was when Representative Kivala's position came up. I think we ate that one. I think that was a special election that the state did not cover, so we ate that one. But previous to that, I think the school district had a couple millage elections, and actually we got reimbursed for all that.
Great. Anything else for Randy? Okay. Well, we got, if we want to be exact, we got about 20 minutes because we started a little late. Or we can close it up.
Well, if you go, maybe the treasurer's budget was just pretty.
Pretty straightforward.
He gets money?
I get some money once in a while. Mine went up a couple $100. No, it's about $2,000. Part was I put in the MTA conference again, and I think that will be able to be moved out again. So other than that, everything is pretty well straightforward, and that we don't anticipate anything big, any new equipment, any new software at this point in time.
Realistically, the travel and conference increase was basically eaten up because the next conference will be in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
The last one was in Traverse City, so it's a quite a bit longer trip and will be a little more expensive in the hotel.
Well, last year you contributed to benefits.
Right, everyone. I put dollars in there for some computer services because we're not quite sure. We kept it in there. We didn't use much, but we don't know what the future is going to bring at this point in time. So, other than that, it's pretty much the same. You drop off the MTA and you're right back where you were. And if you go back in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been pretty static and hasn't changed much at all. We did spend more than we anticipated, but some of that went right through the general fund for attorneys with their personal property stuff and that too. But we're down to the point now, by the end of the month, we're keeping our fingers crossed, but we should have all personal property taken care of for this year. As of now. As I said last time, then we start all over again after the first of the year again too, so. The biggest problem is that we collect it all, but we keep so very little, and then any expenses, we have to bore those expenses and that. We can't charge any of the other entities for anything, that, so if we have to go to the attorney for anything, that's out of our pocket. And we have the administration charge, when you look at the administration charge at 1%, and we start looking at attorney charges, don't even come close in that, and there's nothing we can do about it.
That was part of the discussion on the assessing fiasco that's just still ongoing. And the assessor said she doesn't have any new information. There is another meeting scheduled, so she'll let us know what that result is. But that's one of the discussions, is some of the municipalities were putting that money into their general fund and just spending it for bills when they weren't actually accounting, and I don't know how we break it out, for the cost of what it takes for that assessment. That 1%, that's what it's supposed to go for.
I don't know either. I just know that it has cost us some dollars this year because we've had to use our attorney for some legal things and that, sending letters out and things like this here and that. So it has cost us some dollars in that.
And I'm guessing some of that probably hasn't been billed yet.
That could very well be that too.
The billing cycles.
But it did do the case. It caused them to do some things in that too that they weren't aware of. One of the things was the company did send the money, a partial payment, went to the county. The county didn't know what to do with it. They looked at it, they sent it to Township, Ishpeming Township, Once we tracked that all down, and then we had to get a check cut from Ishpeming Township, and we finally got the check here this week. Yeah, no, we got it Friday, I think it was. And that was a partial payment, so it took us 3 to 4 weeks to get that all resolved in that too. And the
Why did
question,
they cash it?
why did the county even send it to the Ishpeming Township and that? We don't know. It took us a while, and it took Dulcie a lot of tracking down to try and figure out where that check went and that too, so it was, you asked a lot of questions, came up real quick in that, so.
Ernie, if it's costing us more to collect it than we're actually getting out of that, why don't we just write it off?
We have to attempt
We
to
we
collect
have to attempt it. It
Yeah.
takes 5 years before we can write it
Yeah.
off.
Can we attempt it with a letter?
Yeah, we can, we have to keep track of everything we do over that period of time. And when it goes to the judge, all that is there that we try to collect it and everything else, and that we're requesting that you write it off. Give us authority to write it off and that. We can do it. But some of the entities have started looking for the money. See, we collected for all the other entities, and we get such a little bit of it, it isn't really worth it after a while. When you
To
collect
me,
it,
we should just write it off and let somebody else collect it.
you can't do it.
If we try.
State won't let you do it. We are the one that have to do it. We're the bad guy. So when I call somebody or send a letter to them, I'm the bad guy in that. So, telling what, if you don't do it, I have the authority to go in and shut you down and put an auction, pay your bills in that. I haven't had to do that yet, and I don't want to.
I'm gonna sell my house before you get me.
Anything else? We can come back to this, don't worry, it's not like this is the last.
No, this is not even the beginning.
Mhm.
This is just a question and answer type session to be prepared for your first budget session.
I think we've pretty well hit everything.
That's a good place to stop
Biggies,
for today,
yeah.
so.
Okay, call it a day, 2:58.
Yeah, you gotta go with the rest of the agenda though.
So what we'll do then, following this, is I'll get together with Chief Shanahan and Assistant Chief Cochran, and we'll put together some cost options for either the on-call or the staffed weekend holiday issue, and potentially amend the budget request to reflect that, and bring it back to you for your first session.
Some kind of a narrative with
Yep.
all the
How it
explanations.
would work.
Yep, how many people are available and, okay.
And I know we have been talking, you mentioned it, but I know they have been talking about it at their all-staff meetings in terms of, the benefits and downside and who would and wouldn't be available for those kinds of things. So, keep adding, we're adding more EMTs, which is a good thing.
What I'd like to see
It'd be
is,
great to be all firefighter EMTs.
what I'd like to see is, we talked a while back about having some training, for our employees.
Yeah, we do have 2 of our current firefighters that will be going into the EMT training program in January. So by June of next year, we'll have 2 more of our existing staff that will be EMTs as well.
Okay, we have no public other than Lisa, if you want to ask a question or something. And any announcements?
I won't.
Uh-huh.
I won't.
We don't need a motion, really, but we can adjourn at 3 p.m.
What date is Sarah coming?
23rd.
23rd? 23rd.
Sarah Cambenzi's going to do an open house.
Yeah.
Tax, primarily tax information.
Sorry, I thought we were done.
That's okay. We had to just go through.
The motion.